Welcome to Leadership Latam. The regime's countdown is evident. Venezuela is on the verge of a historic change, and the entire world is watching closely. Nicolás Maduro's tyranny is receiving its strongest civic and social attacks in years, and today we will give you an advance of the few options that remain. Venezuela faces one of the most critical moments in its contemporary history, where the possibility of recovering true democracy is getting closer. The defeat of María Corina Machado and the Venezuelan opposition will have repercussions throughout the continent, generating effects that will impact countries such as Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, Brazil, Bolivia, and Chile, whose leaders are very concerned about the situation. The last battles are the most decisive, and the entire world is watching expectantly how the final chapters of one of the darkest periods of the Caribbean country unfold. Two tactics face each other in a decisive duel. Maduro plays his options by bringing Cubans on secret flights to support the armed forces, removes generals who are not willing to repress, sends out shock troops with Cubans with their faces covered, and infiltrates demonstrations trying to create unrest. María Corina promotes peaceful marches and asks her followers not to fall for provocations, shows her minutes to the public, and challenges the regime to show how it justifies the victory. She uploads information about the election results to the networks and invites every citizen to verify with their number that the information is true, categorical, and forceful. She asks for serenity and patience because they are going to collect their victory.
Con inteligencia, con prudencia, con resiliencia, con audacia y pacíficamente, porque la violencia les conviene a ellos. Nosotros no atacamos a otros venezolanos.
Maduro creates a fantastic story of a hack and uses state institutions to simply claim that he won the elections. He does not present evidence, and clinging to a surprising and fervent Catholic faith, she appears on a religious side asking the population to believe without seeing, to just believe. In parallel, she sends for all the polling station witnesses, kidnaps them, and forces them to sign a document in which they confess to having lied about the election information. She asks her followers to remove WhatsApp and the X network and continues with the plan to frighten all the opposition.
Claro, está Elon Musk dirigiendo el golpe de Estado, Elon Musk y todo el poder de ellos. Pero nuestros equipos también se la traen. Nuestros equipos llevan la fuerza de David contra Goliat. Elon Musk, serás muy Goliat, pero la fuerza de David nos pertenece a nosotros. Fueron múltiples los llamados y gritos de fraude de este sector de la extrema derecha radical, criminal y violenta de Venezuela. Los gritos de fraude, múltiples, ya los vamos a mostrar para poder ilustrar ante ustedes nuevamente de qué se trata este plan de golpe de Estado. Es un golpe de Estado dirigido por los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica y la internacional fascista, la derecha fascista, con Elon Musk, Milei y toda esa pelambre de extremistas del fascismo y del capitalismo salvaje del mundo.
María Corina, on the other hand, uses social media technologies to receive information and communicate with her teams, maintaining a strategy of joint protection and public denunciation of the abuses, kidnappings, and threats to the members of her teams and the polling station witnesses. She gives interviews to all the international media and is in contact with all the leaders of Latin America who are joining in the demands and pressure on the regime. The strategies are absolutely opposite, while Maduro locks himself in a position of only one truth, using force and coercion. He expels diplomats, closes embassies, persecutes and imprisons the opposition, and carries out acts forcing public employees to attend. He cuts relations with countries that do not recognize his victory without proof. He retires the militias that do not respond to him, brings in Cuban soldiers to reinforce their security and control the generals of the FAMB, and asks the Attorney General to move forward with the accusations for hate crimes. In short, a totalitarian, anti-democratic, and militaristic strategy. History has not presented such a clear case of fascist doctrine for many years. The ideological confusion is so great that María Corina Machado is branded as ultra-right for wanting a participatory democracy, opening Venezuela to the world and integrating into foreign trade. The left imposes labels that seek to discredit and calls cases such as Milei, Bukele, or María Corina herself extreme right, as if all three had the same economic models. And the problem is that with the successful macroeconomic results that the Argentine Javier Milei, who does represent the right, is already having, they are leading by contrast to everyone wanting that model before Maduro's. The ideological spectrum of all of America will be organized in these years. The old categories are no longer valid, but they do manage to show which models are beginning to be rejected by society. In this way, with these different actions between Nicolás Maduro and María Corina Machado, they are helping the entire region to define very well what type of leader or government is the one that one does not want for one's country. Maduro is making the entire socialist ideology implode from within, something similar to what former President Alberto Fernández did with Peronism in Argentina. His actions are so bad and his miseries are so great that no one will be able to have proposals that resemble him on an electoral platform. When Nicolás Maduro leaves power, he will have left socialism associated with the worst crimes and misdemeanors in the history of the entire continent. Petro, Lula, Boric, Kirchner, and Ortega will no longer have a political future because they are left-wing or have had close ties, beyond their own individual merits, to the corruption of each country. Let's go back to Venezuela. Since the elections of July 28, 2024, an imaginary hourglass has been turned, marking the time until January 10, 2025. The date on which the elected president must take office. Nobody knows what the end will be like, but there is no doubt that it is approaching. The presidential elections mark the point of no return for the Nicolás Maduro regime. Despite desperate attempts to maintain a democratic facade, the overwhelming evidence of fraud and the ridiculous arguments used to proclaim themselves the winner left the regime without any credibility and marked the end of the democratic farce that they presented to the world. Maduro's truly pathetic appearances in the media, expressing his conspiracy theories and his capricious resistance to showing the minutes to stay in power, turned him into a mirror in which no nation wants to see itself. His level of stupidity is escalating so much that he has already managed to get the OAS to agree on a ruling that forces him to present the minutes. Even his allies of a few months ago do not dare to issue any comment in his defense. The scandalous fraud was so evident that it is accelerating all the options for international intervention. Petro and Lula, in their desperation to sustain the unsustainable, went so far as to propose, as an alternative solution, that Venezuela repeat the elections. María Corina responded to both of them clearly and explained a couple of things that they seem not to be assimilating in their manipulative speeches.
Mucha gente me dijo que estábamos locos, que nos estábamos arriesgando y que iba a haber un fraude monumental que no íbamos a poder probar. Y nosotros confiamos en la organización ciudadana. Y hubo gente que arriesgó su vida, su familia, su hogar, y otros fueron asesinados. Hoy en día están presos, escondidos o han tenido que huir del país. Plantear desconocer lo ocurrido el 28 de julio, para mí es una falta de respeto a los venezolanos que han dado todo y que expresaron la soberanía popular. La soberanía popular se respeta y las elecciones ya ocurrieron.
The response was so overwhelming, and to this was added the massive support of protesters around the world and in Caracas itself, that both Petro and Lula have already let go of Maduro. Nicolás Maduro is so alone that he has no choice but to fall back on a repressive model that combats all opposition demonstrations, but the problem is that the demonstrations are all peaceful and the protesters record everything with their cell phones, revealing their maneuvers and leaving the dictator fighting against the wind. A complex and very difficult period is coming for Venezuelan residents because the persecution of opponents and citizens who, under the accusation of hate crimes, will be arbitrarily detained will increase, and this situation is already affecting the families of the military because the majority is not willing to hurt the people, especially now that it is absolutely clear that the government did not win the elections. The members of all the armed forces have already understood that they are being used to keep a tyrant in power, but they do not have the organic capacity to revolt because Cuban infiltrators are closely monitoring them. In all the bases, garrisons, and barracks, debate takes place in silence, and they are careful not to use social networks for any compromising communication. The process is going to be slow because no one wants to revolt, but no one wants to repress either. The highest ranks are also very clear that any crime they commit against the people will be a crime against humanity and therefore not subject to a statute of limitations. The International Criminal Court has its sights set on the situation in Venezuela. Any documented complaint is an international arrest warrant that they do not want to have. The High Command, those who already have an international arrest warrant and have business dealings with drug trafficking and truly unjustifiable income, are in a very complicated situation. They cannot give up power, since they know that if Maduro negotiates a way out, he will not include them, so they are betting that the regime will continue, but they are a relatively small number to face the entire army if it comes against them. Time is eroding them. Every day that passes is a day of greater uncertainty for the generals and the small circle that runs the government. Vladimir Padrino and Diosdado Cabello pressure Maduro to continue with the farce and the self-definition of a revolutionary, free, sovereign, and patriotic government, but Maduro is showing wear and tear that is noticeable on his face and in the desperation of his speeches. International sanctions are coming, pressure from the world's media is coming, the noisy campaign on social networks showing the abuses of the regime is coming, massive hacking by Anonymous is coming, and more peaceful marches are coming from a people who, unlike the government, have more hope every day that passes. María Corina Machado and Edmundo González Urrutia have put their bodies on the line to show the world that there is no democracy and that the elections have been a fraud for years. They always knew it, and now they have also gathered the evidence and sent it to other countries. In this chess game in which María Corina challenged the regime, she has had the advantage of seeing it in advance and calibrating it with great precision, while Maduro has to play the king while the moves are decided in Cuba. Each move by María Corina gains new pieces, while Maduro runs serious risks of losing key pieces, as the army discovers that they are being turned into a force against the people. It is only a matter of time. The best option for Maduro and his inner circle would be to accept the transition proposal that María Corina Machado continues to offer before the situation deteriorates even further. The government of Nicolás Maduro, as of January 10, 2025, will formally be an unconstitutional dictatorship that will be usurping power against the popular will. Until that date, he is only a tyrant who does not recognize the result of the elections, which is no small thing, but he is still legally exercising his mandate. Qualified sources said that in the secret negotiations that Maduro's emissary is carrying out with the United States, they gave him a deadline until November. Due to issues with the presidential campaign of the United States itself, they want to have the issue agreed upon so that it is not precisely a campaign problem. The Biden administration wants to present Maduro's exit agreement as a success to bequeath to Kamala Harris. Otherwise, it will be a difficult issue to handle in the campaign, with a Donald Trump willing to give a harsh and critical speech and who would capitalize on everything in his favor. In Latin America, the United States of America has always been questioned for its interventions in countries in the form of a coup d'etat. Much of society has a historical memory to remember cases like Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala or Salvador Allende in Chile. Some intellectuals are worried that Maduro is giving them the perfect excuse to redeem themselves in history and become the country that returns democracy to Venezuela and frees them from tyranny. The popular clamor of Venezuelans asks for someone to save them without hesitation, and for the United States it would be fruitful because it is a fight against the Cartel de los Soles and the Cuban Secret Service. The international community accelerated the attack, and both the OAS and the UN are going to take the issue as a priority. In addition, every day there are fewer embassies and consulates in Venezuela, so diplomatic channels are being exhausted. In order to restore real democracy in Venezuela, there are only two options. The first is the truth. International justice and a coalition of international organizations must demand, without further delay, the presentation of the minutes that support the result announced by the CNE and compare them with the documentation compiled by the opposition, also opening a formal negotiation table. International observers from both parties must reach a single joint opinion on the minutes and the result. It seems complex, but it is a simple comparison of information, and if they do not coincide, an expert opinion is made. If they do not collaborate, the fraud would be confirmed and the legitimacy of the Maduro government would be completely destroyed. At the negotiation table, the requests that the outgoing government might have are reviewed and a diplomatic agreement with mutual commitments is reached. If the above is not achieved, or if we reach January 10th, 2025 without them handing over power, there will be no other alternative than to move on to the second. And the second option is nothing other than an international intervention. If the regime refuses to present the documentation that grants it the victory declared by the government, it is evident that they do not want to recognize the truth of the ballot boxes. In that case, the Venezuelan government must be treated as an unconstitutional tyranny that has taken power by force, and the only option left is an armed international intervention, which has all the strength and consensus necessary to re-establish democracy and hand over power to the legitimate winners of the elections of July 28, 2024. The international community will have to see how this armed force is integrated and an international army of occupation is created. The mere announcement that the first option failed will generate a massive request from Venezuelan civil society for the country's army to serve the country and collaborate in the ouster of the illegitimate government. All this is what is happening right now. As the days go by, we are closer to both options. Venezuela is in overtime. Maduro's days in power are numbered, and the Venezuelan people have assumed the responsibility of defending their vote, but they cannot do it alone. The international community has understood that a tyrant in Venezuela affects the entire region. We hope that diplomatic efforts can show the world that a peaceful solution can be reached, rescuing an entire citizenry and preventing the perpetuation of a tyrant, whether in Venezuela or anywhere else on the planet. The future of Venezuela, and possibly that of the entire region, depends on what is done in the coming months. The world is watching, and history will not forget. Do you think that the international community will allow the tyranny to continue, or will they take decisive measures to restore democracy? We'll read your comments.